Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a guy who has sparked, honestly, one of the most intense, never-ending debates in television history. We are unpacking the complex psychology of Friends' very own Ross Geller. Now, for some, he's this hopelessly romantic, fiercely loyal friend. For others, he's an emotionally exhausting, controlling nightmare. So today, we're going to look right past the sitcom laugh tracks and apply a real psychological lens to his behavior.
So, the million-dollar question we have to ask ourselves is this. Was Ross Geller actually TV's most toxic boyfriend? Or have we spent the last 2 decades completely missing the psychological nuance of a truly deeply flawed person? The answer isn't just a simple yes or no. And, well, by the time we finish breaking this down over the next few minutes, you might just see one of pop culture's most controversial figures in a completely different light.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's actually wild. More than 20 years later, people are still fiercely arguing about him online. It's fascinating. So, instead of picking sides and just yelling into the digital void with everyone else, we're going to look at this completely objectively. We're going to use psychology to understand the root of his actions, really mapping out his insecurities and his missteps to see what is genuinely driving the man behind the paleontology degree.
Section 1. Where the baggage began.
To really understand Ross, we have to look at his baseline character before his famous romance even kicked off. The guy enters the series carrying emotional baggage that most sitcoms barely even touch. First, his marriage to Carol falls apart when she realizes she's gay. Now, this isn't just a tough breakup. This is the total rapid collapse of the entire future Ross had envisioned for himself. He loses his marriage, his family dynamic shifts literally overnight, and he's thrust into a really difficult co-parenting situation with Susan. Psychologically speaking, a sudden trauma like this doesn't just make you sad. It creates profound trust issues and a deeply rooted baseline fear of abandonment. Now, it doesn't excuse his later behavior, but it absolutely explains his extreme anxiety whenever he feels emotionally threatened.
Moving on to Section 2, Diagnosing Anxious Attachment.
Now, what's really interesting about this is, to Ross, Rachel isn't just a new girlfriend. She's his idealized 10-year dream. He's loved her since high school, so when they finally start dating, he's desperately trying to protect this incredibly fragile fantasy. And this perfectly aligns with anxious attachment. Basically, it's an attachment style where a person is absolutely terrified of rejection. They're constantly scanning their environment for signs that their partner is going to leave them. Because of this intense fear, Ross constantly needs reassurance. He simply cannot respect Rachel's growing independence because his anxiety convinces him that if he isn't constantly present, she's going to disappear.
Which, of course, brings us to Mark, the coworker who sparks so much of their conflict. From Rachel's perspective, Mark is just a helpful guy aiding her professional growth. But from Ross's anxious perspective, Mark is a direct, immediate threat to his survival. And here is the ultimate irony of their whole dynamic. Rachel never actually asks Ross to stop caring. She just asks him to trust her. Trust, not love, was the missing ingredient in their relationship.
Look, feeling jealous is a completely normal human emotion. Almost everyone experiences it, but it's how you respond to jealousy that really matters. And Ross responds with severe controlling behaviors. He sends excessive gifts to her office, repeatedly inserts himself into her workplace, and completely ignores her professional boundaries. He does this because his own fears feel so much more urgent to him than her needs do. But those actions don't create security. They just create this immense, suffocating pressure.
From a psychological standpoint, that behavior is undeniably unhealthy. But does unhealthy automatically mean toxic? Well, not necessarily. You see, the word toxic implies a consistent, calculated pattern of manipulation designed to control or break down another person. Ross definitely behaves poorly, but his missteps stem largely from severe emotional immaturity and unmanaged anxiety, rather than some calculated malicious desire to manipulate Rachel. And honestly, that difference is absolutely critical when analyzing his character.
And of course, that brings us to the most infamous argument in sitcom history. We were on a break. People debate the technicalities of this endlessly, but psychology tells us that the legal definition of the relationship status actually matters way less than the emotional context. Rachel believed the relationship wasn't truly over, while Ross believed it was completely dead. Neither of them took a single breath to actually process the breakup before acting on pure, unregulated emotion.
Ross, who is absolutely devastated and completely convinced his 10-year dream is dead, drinks heavily and sleeps with Chloe that very same night. It's incredibly impulsive and it's deeply hurtful, and whether you think he technically cheated or not, the emotional damage he inflicted on Rachel is completely understandable. Ultimately, intent just doesn't erase consequences.
That brings us to Section 3, Ego and Emotional Regulation.
A major criticism of Ross is his rigid need to always be right.
And that stems directly from his professional identity as a paleontologist, where facts are literally everything. So the crucial point here is this concept of ego defensiveness. Because Ross builds his entire identity around being the smart one, the expert. Admitting he's wrong feels like an existential threat. It feels like admitting he's completely inadequate. This is exactly why, instead of just listening and offering a simple apology, Ross constantly explains and defends himself. He protects his ego at the cost of emotional connection.
And this brilliantly illustrates his broader struggle with emotional regulation. Think about all those chaotic moments, getting stuck in the leather pants, the disastrous spray tan, the constant panicking and jumping to conclusions. Underneath the comedy of it all, you're seeing a man whose feelings frequently outrun his judgment. He constantly escalates situations instead of just slowing down and thinking clearly.
Section 4. The case for empathy.
Look, if we only focus on his flaws, we reduce him to a one-dimensional villain, and that just isn't accurate. To properly balance the scales here, we have to highlight his genuine goodness. Despite the intense pain of his divorce, he supports Carol and Susan. He is a deeply devoted father to Ben and Emma. He helps his friends unconditionally without ever asking for credit. He constantly encourages Joey, and his feelings for Rachel remain profoundly sincere. Now, love alone doesn't make a healthy relationship, for sure, but it is entirely unfair to judge Ross only by his worst moments while ignoring years of his loyalty, kindness, and sacrifice.
Let's bring it all together in Section 5, the final verdict.
Let's synthesize these opposing views, the anxious, ego-defensive partner and the loyal, devoted friend, to understand why he remains such a compelling character today. It's super important to remember that the creators of Friends intentionally gave us imperfect characters. Monica is highly controlling, Chandler hides behind sarcasm, Joey actively avoids commitment, Phoebe is wildly unpredictable, and Rachel can be incredibly self-centered. Ross's flaws just happen to be the easiest to debate because they heavily revolve around incredibly relatable relationship and communication issues. They trigger our own real-world frustrations.
So, is Ross toxic? Well, he absolutely displays unhealthy behaviors. The jealousy, the poor communication, the utter lack of boundaries. And those behaviors completely deserve criticism. But simply labeling him toxic kind of erases the beautifully flawed, realistic human complexity of a man who is intelligent but insecure, loving but fearful. He isn't a villain. He's a guy whose unresolved fears constantly sabotage his own happiness. He makes massive mistakes, but he also learns, he grows, and he keeps trying.
And maybe that is the most powerful takeaway this explainer can offer. Unaddressed insecurity doesn't just stay inside us. It bleeds out and it affects everyone we love. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to consider long after we wrap up here. Unaddressed insecurity affects everyone we love. Who is it affecting in your life? Think about it. Thanks so much for learning with us today, and stay tuned for our next deep dive.